So let's review chapter 4. All right, chapter 4 is all about understanding fractions and understanding ratios. Because a ratio is another term for a fraction. Okay? A ratio is another term or another word that means a fraction. But ratios are different kinds of fractions. A ratio is a fraction that compares two different amounts, or two different things, I should say. Okay? A ratio is, for example, if we had a drawing of, let me put this way. Let me draw a ratio of stars to circles. Okay? These are two different things. And we can write those two different things as a ratio. How many stars are there compared to circles? How many stars are there? Count the stars, people.
Count the stars.
Matt?
The stars.
5 stars. So the ratio of stars is 5 to circles, which is 3. Yep. The stars to circles are 5 to 3. So ratios can be written this way. Ratios can also be written as a fraction. 5 to 3. And that compares the number of stars to the number of circles. We can write this ratio in a different way by writing how many circles are there compared to the stars. What is the ratio of circles to stars? Now it's the other way around. What is the ratio of circles to stars? Megan?
3 over 5.
Right. 3 over 5. 3 circles to 5 stars. Okay? We could also write it this way. 3 to 5 with the colon. As a ratio of circles to stars. Now, what amount of objects are stars? How would you answer that in a fraction? What amount of the objects, or how many stars are there out of the total? How many stars out of the total? What fraction of them are stars? Nate?
5/8.
5/8.
What?
So when you write them, when you're writing it as a fraction is the amount, amount out of the total. Okay, so the amount of stars out of the total is 5 out of 8. So a fraction is an amount out of the total. So a fraction of circles out of the total is what? Right in?
3/8.
3/8. 3 out of 8 total. Okay? The difference between ratios and fractions are ratios can be used to compare two different things, like stars and circles, whereas fractions tell you the amount out of the total. Okay? Any questions on what ratios and fractions are? So, that was our first lesson, was learning about fractions, and then I drew out some fractions because that's basically what we're working mostly with in this chapter, is writing fractions, drawing fractions, and then recognizing fractions on a number line or on a measuring stick. And fractions also relate to decimal amounts. Okay? Then, fractions are also ratios. We talked about that a little bit. Here's another example. How many boys are there in 6th grade?
What is in
13, right? The 13 boys?
12. It's 12. I said 2.
But Bennett is also in 6th grade.
12.
12?
Yeah, it's 12.
There's 19 students. So is there 7 girls?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I said
7 girls,
Wait, what?
12 boys. So the ratio of boys to girls is 12 to 7. Okay? Or we would write that, how could you write that with a colon in between?
Because boys is on the top, so you do 12 first.
Yep. 12,
And then you do colons, and then you do
7. Yep. So that's written as a ratio. Okay? Now, then we also learned that in a fraction, the top number divided by the bottom number gives us the decimal. The top number is the dividend, that's the number that goes inside the house, and the bottom number is the divisor, right? That's how you change a fraction to a decimal. Let's go on to 2. In lesson 2, we talked about writing equivalent fractions. And we talked about equivalent fractions. What is it that's equivalent about fractions?
equivalent.
Equivalent fractions mean
Equal the same.
equal
Equal amounts.
Yep. Equivalent fractions are 2 different ways to write equal amounts. Okay? And to find an equivalent fraction, you can multiply or divide the top number and the bottom number, so the numerator and the denominator, by the same number. And then you can also find lowest terms, or what's another word for lowest terms? What's another word or a phrase that means lowest terms? It's on your sheet. Starts with an S.
Oh.
Now we're getting there. Abby?
Simplest form.
Simplest form. Yep. Simplest form. And so, if you started with a fraction like 24 out of 42, you can find simplest form by dividing it by the same number. And then check and see if that's simplest form. And then see, no, this 12 over 21 can also be divided by the same number. So divide it again. And then you get 4/7. And then simplest form means that there are no more common factors, meaning that there's no more of the numbers that you can divide both numbers by, and the top number is not a factor of the bottom number. You can't divide the top number by the bottom number. Okay? Also, if one or both of them are prime numbers, then you know you're close, as long as they're not divisible by each other. Okay, so what are prime numbers? Remember? Tate?
Oh, I was just stretching.
Oh, Olivia? Prime numbers.
2, 3.
Okay, those are examples, yeah. Now, what is a definition of a prime number?
They can be multiplied by itself and 1.
And 1. To get the number, you can only multiply the number by 1 to make the number. So 7, the only way you can make 7 is to multiply 7 times 1. Okay? So 7 is a prime number. Alright? Then we talked about fractions and mixed numbers. Or we know that mixed numbers make top-heavy fractions. Right? And in order to get a mixed number, divide the top number by the bottom number. That gives us how many whole numbers we can make. And then find the remainder, because that's the remaining pieces that are left over. And you write that over the denominator. So 5 halves can make 2 1/2. Okay? Divide the top number by the bottom number. Take the remainder and write it over the divisor. And then to make a mixed number into a fraction, don't do that. I already warned you. Multiply the whole number by the denominator. That tells you how many pieces you can make out of the whole number, right? Right? Yep. And then add the pieces you already have to get the total number of pieces. And then write that over the denominator. Sit down and pay attention. Okay, then we went to lesson 4.4. Writing decimals as fractions and making decimals out of fractions. Okay? So writing decimals as a fraction, 5/10. What you do is read the number and then write the place of the last digit as the denominator. 5/10 is 5/10. 1 and 25/100 is written as 1 and 25/100. But always remember to then put it into simplest form. So 1 and 25/100 is really 1/4, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Now, if you are starting with 1/9 or 2/7, sometimes you'll run into fractions, and if you divide the fractions, you can get a decimal. So the top number divided by the bottom number equals a decimal. Like 1 divided by 5 is 2/10. And 2 divided by 5 is 4/10. And sometimes when you divide the top number by the bottom number, you get a repeating decimal. Like 1/3, 1 divided by 3 is 0.3 repeating. So you write that with the repeating sign over the digits that repeat. Right? Then we talked about how ones like ninths always repeat. And they're easy to find the decimal form because the top number is the number that repeats. So 1/9 is 1 repeating. Or 1/10 repeating. 2/9 is 2/10 repeating. 3/9 is really 1/3, which is 3/10 repeating. 4/9 is 4/10 repeating, and so on. Right?
Yep.
So we talked about those patterns. And then we went to how to use that to compare fractions. Fractions, decimals, and percents. Percents are any number, any decimal number multiplied by 100, right? We talked about how when you are given a grade, you can find your percent by dividing the top number by the bottom number. That gets the decimal form. And then converting it to a percent by multiplying by 100. And then you did an assignment with the chart. So going from a percent form to a decimal form, and then a decimal form to a fraction form, and working the other way. Fraction form to a decimal form, and decimal to a percent form. Everybody comfortable with that? And then we talked about comparing fractions. And so, and other numbers. When you're comparing numbers, you have to put them in the same form. So they all have to be in decimal form. That's enough now, guys. Okay? Decimal form, fraction form, so they have the same denominator. And then you can tell the value of them. Which ones are greatest and which ones are greater or least. The less than sign points to the left. The greater than sign points to the right. So if we were writing this out, 2/3 is greater than 2/5 because 10/15 are greater than 6/15. Okay? You remember doing that? Okay. So, you should know how to change a fraction to a decimal. You should know what a percent is. And you should know how to compare fractions and find a common denominator when you compare them. Okay? And then we did some problem solving with fractions in lesson 4-7. We just did that. And using the numbers from a table to find the difference between the numbers, making sure that when you're subtracting, you can subtract numbers that have that are in the same form. Okay? Any questions then from your evaluation sheet? I think we went through all the concepts. Any questions from your evaluation sheet? Yes?
Can we switch our answers now to the ratio?
Yes, so then rate it again. Don't change them.